All right, so we are writing equations of the trig functions. We're looking for the same kind of information that we were looking for the last few days when we were just looking for it, and then also when we were graphing. So here's our transformations. Again, still without C. We'll talk about our phase shifts tomorrow. So as a reminder, we should have this down pat by now. Amplitude is the absolute value of A. The period we find by doing 2 pi divided by the absolute value of B. The frequency is the absolute value of B. And when I gave you the definition of frequency and I told you what the actual definition is, and then I told you ours sounds a little bit different because of the 1 unit that we're using, and our 1 unit is 2 pi, which kind of makes it weird. I had some people ask me to kind of clarify that, and so I did, but I'm going to clarify it better again for everybody next week. I didn't want to talk too much about it the first day because I didn't want it to confuse things, because it doesn't really affect how we're graphing, but it does affect your understanding of frequency in general if it matters for you in any kind of physics class that you're taking. So whether or not that specific type of thing is going to come up in AP Physics, I'm not sure. It probably does in Physics C or in any kind of, college physics class. I don't want you to just think that things look weird. So I'll just explain it to everybody, and then it can just be interesting to some of y'all or whatever. All right, so then vertical shift is D, and the midline y equals D. So hopefully we get all that, because then that makes all of this that much easier. So we're going to start with, we have to find these 4 things and then write our equation. So the first thing we always want to do from the graph is sketch in our midline. Sketch in that midline, and then that midline is at y equals 1. Amplitude, I can easily count from the midline, that's 1. Then I can trace 1 cycle of this, and when I do that, then is this a sine or a cosine function? This is sine. This is a sine of x. And this 1 cycle goes through 4 pi, so the period is 4 pi. The frequency I can either get from the period or from the graph. So if I do it from the period, it's 2 pi divided by the period, when that would give me a 1/2 here. Or I can look at how many cycles do I get through in 2 pi units. So there's 2 pi, and notice I only get through half of a cycle. That's another way we can come up with the 1/2. Either graphically or algebraically, it doesn't matter, okay? So then my equation, of these 4 things, which one of them isn't really directly A, B, or D? Like, which one isn't going just kind of straight into my equation? Well, the midline, I realized as I was saying that, it doesn't go in there as an equation, but I'm going to use that number. But 4 pi isn't going to be part of that equation, right? So one of the reasons I'm re-recording right now is because I've been doing this, because I've always done this with f of x, because it's a function. But when you write it in delta math, when you have to put in the whole thing, including the y, if you put in f of x, it counts it wrong. I didn't realize that until last period. So we're going to write all of ours with y's. So y equals, but f of x is appropriate as well. Amplitude, which is 1, so I don't write it. I've determined it's a sine function, so I take the sine of the frequency, which is 1/2, times x, and then plus 1. Okay. On some of the ones that you do in delta math, the y is already there, and some of them it's just a box and it says equation, so then you have to put the y equals. But we learned the hard way last period. It has to be y equals and not f of x. Not really sure why. I really think it should take both. But any questions at all? All right, let's look at number 2. So the midline on the first one was pretty simple to sketch in. This one isn't difficult, but the taller they are, the more you have to make sure you're really putting it in the right spot. You could even do a little bit of math. This is at 2, this is at -6. So you want the middle, which is the average. -6 plus 2 is -4. Take half of that and you're at -2. So the midline is at y equals -2. My amplitude, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to trace 1 cycle here, somewhere here, right? And so is this sine or cosine? Cosine. So this is the cosine of x. And this 1 cycle here goes through pi halves units, so the period is pi halves. I don't see 2 pi on my graph, so can't pull frequency directly off there just like that. We still can get it from the graph, but we'll look at it algebraically first. I would take 2 pi and then divide it by the period, but since it's a fraction, I would just multiply by the reciprocal, which then would give me my frequency as 4. If I look at the graph, I can see that I go through 2 full cycles in pi units. So to get to 2 pi, it would take 2 more, and that's another way you could get the 4. Just with some reasoning, even though you can't see 2 pi. It doesn't really matter how you get it, as long as you get it and you can figure it out. So then to write our equation, y equals amplitude, which is 4. This is a cosine function. B is 4 times x minus 2. Any questions at all? All right. If you don't have any questions, then I want you to do number 3 on your own. Trent, I need you to turn your video on, please. I shouldn't have to ask. Thank you. Any questions? Understand where everything's coming from? How to get it? All right, so if you're good, then go ahead and do number 4. And remember that you always take the sine, cosine, tangent, secant, cosecant, cotangent of an angle. And so our input is x, which is our angles. And so make sure we're not putting a b there because it's 1, so we don't put that. But don't forget the x. You still have to have a variable of some sort, an angle of some sort. Okay. We're getting there. Just keep thinking. Don't Google it yet. I want you to keep thinking because your wheels are turning, right? Because you're trying to picture it, yes? Okay, so I want you to think, and I mean, if you want to look it up, fine, but I want you to think a little bit more, but we'll get to that. We're trying to get, I'm doing this a little bit differently than I have in the past, because usually we do sine, cosine, and tangent together, but we're trying to just get through all of the graphing with sine and cosine so we understand how the graphing works, and then we'll throw in the other ones. So that's a very good question, and it is much different than these. All right, any other questions on this? Okay. All right, so so in Delta Math, there's a couple of different ways that this part's going to work. There will be some where it's just straight up a graph like this, you come up with the equation. There will be some, kind of like you've done with some of the other graphing, where the parent function is solid, I think, and then what they're trying to get you to is dotted, and then you're just going to fill in the A, B, and D, and it won't even let you get it wrong if you're wrong. You just say, graph it, and if it's wrong, you have an opportunity to adjust it. So it's the same, it's just kind of, you're filling in the blanks of those. And then the third way is with just the information, like on these last ones. So we're going to write the equation from this. So this says, write a cosine function that has an amplitude of 1/2, so that's the A. Midline, y equals -4, so that's the D. And then this is the period, which is not B. And remember, the absolute value of B is 2 pi divided by the period. So I would take 2 pi, divide it by 4 pi. That gives me 1/2. That is B. then I have the A, B, and the D that I need to write the equation. So y equals the amplitude, which is 1/2, times, it tells me it's cosine. B is 1/2 times x minus 4. Okay. Any questions at all? We good? All right. We're going to skip number 6 for just a minute, and we're going to go to number 7 next. So we're going to write a sine function. Amplitude is the A. Midline, that's D. And then period is pi thirds. So I would do 2 pi divided by that, but I'm not going to write it that way. I'm just going to go ahead and multiply by the reciprocal, which is 3 over pi, which means that I get that B equals 6. Then once I have that, I have everything I need to write this. So I get y equals A, which is 3, times the sine of B, which is 6, times x. D is 0, so I don't put anything, and that's it. Okay. Any questions at all? Okay, so if you get it, you have no questions, then I want you to do 6, 8, and 9 on your own. And I'll give you a second to get started on that before I work through that. Yes, sir. Oh, okay. Are you still thinking about tangent? So because you're... Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're on the right track. And so that's kind of what I wanted you to do. Instead of just like looking at it, take some of the kind of the easy ones like we did here where we just had values of 0 and 1 and graph some of those and kind of come up with it. Kind of, yes. It has that kind of feel to it, yes. So after you check yourself with me, if you have any questions, please let me know. Second period actually talked to me today. They asked me questions. They even asked each other questions at their table and talked to each other. I almost fell over. So if they can do it, y'all can do it. Okay, something about second and sixth. Nobody wants to talk, which is not always a bad thing, but I just want to make sure you actually, if you have questions, you're getting them answered.